Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Nick Messmer, and I'm here with Kevin Grosso. We are the co-founders of Biblingo, and we want to share today how to enhance your biblical language classes with Biblingo. So for those who don't know, most probably do, but Biblingo is a software program for learning the biblical languages. And really what we're trying to do with it, bottom line, is really take a solid biblical language curriculum and integrate that with some of the latest methods that are coming out of research in the field of second language acquisition, as well as some of the latest technology that is being implemented for language learning. So that's really what Biblingo is all about. What we're planning to cover in this webinar first are the principles and the methodology that make Biblingo effective, efficient, and engaging for learning the biblical languages. We'll give a complete demo, a very concise but complete demo of the Biblingo program and how it helps students achieve specific learning outcomes. And then we'll talk about how teachers can incorporate the Biblingo program as well as some of our bonus teacher materials into their classes. And finally, how teachers and institutions as a whole can partner with Biblingo. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Kevin, and he's going to kick us off.
So for those that have kept up with our podcast, we have just finished a 6-part series on methodology. And we looked at a lot of different things. So I'm not going to, this is going to be very short. There's a lot of good stuff in there if you guys want to take a listen. But I wanted to just explain the ways in which the methodology that we kind of adopted in the background plays into Biblingo and how it's designed. Okay, so on a very basic level, everything in Biblingo is about comprehensible input. And so this is not something that is well understood, actually. Most people think of comprehensible input as just input that you can comprehend, but that's actually not the case. When Stephen Krashen in 1985 wrote his book called The Input Hypothesis, what he said was basically that comprehensible input is input at your level, what you know, which is I, right? Plus one new thing that you don't know, right? So it's input that you, that challenges you to, acquire something new. It's not just input that you understand, right? So the idea is that you have something and what you need to progress in your knowledge of the language is you need native speaker input of something that you don't already know, right? And so that just, at a very basic level, just involves exposure to, we'll call it 1, right? So we have I plus 1. So this was this kind of formula, okay? So now the question is, how do we learn the content of 1, right? What exactly is 1, right? So when we talk about 1 and like this new content in the language, we're specifically talking about the meaning of whatever that new thing is, right? So we're not necessarily talking about like the form of it, right? And so this is where, we are talking about the form, but we're specifically connecting that form with its meaning, okay? So you haven't really learned, whatever new grammatical form, if you just know how to parse it, right? What you have to do is you have to know then what that form means, okay? So we're connecting morphology with meaning. And the next step then, right, is making this new information, whatever it is, right, part of your knowledge base, right, I, okay? So how do we do that? How do we make 1 a part of I, right? And so there are 2 like key components to this, specifically in how we make that new material part of like our long-term memory. One is deep processing. So whenever you encounter the material, you need to process it in a way that it sticks, right? And there's all kinds of things in our memory, or in studies on memory, on what this actually looks like, right? But suffice it to say, in language, there is a kind of a graded hierarchy of like how difficult, for example, like the use of words of a particular vocabulary word is. So like if you know how to produce a word actively in speaking, then you should know how to read it, as long as you know how to read, right? So the idea is that active knowledge, like speaking, is a harder skill and requires actually a deeper processing than passive knowledge. And so what some researchers have found from this is that if you practice speaking, for example, speaking vocabulary words, you will actually get better at listening than if you just practice listening. Okay, so I mean that seems counterintuitive, but this is the research from Hopman and McDonald, recent research, just showing that people who focused on speaking were actually better at the easier skills, right? Because they had deeper processing, right? And the other thing is spaced repetition. So you need to just continually see, this new material again and again and again at increasingly longer intervals. And then the next thing you need to do, right, is you need to work on I, right? What your knowledge base is to begin with. So the question is, how do we maximize the usability of I in communication? And this is where fluency comes in. So fluency is just being able to use what you already know. So fluency is not knowing a lot. It's knowing something well, right? Within just how we're defining it. So you can be very fluent at a small amount of information, and you're fluent really at different skills, right? So you can be, fluent at listening or reading, but not as fluent at writing and speaking, for example. And usually you do have different levels of fluency with different skills. Okay. So the question is, how do we keep these things balanced, and how do we develop a program that allows us to progress in our knowledge of the language, right? Where we are continuing to bolster and strengthen I, and at the same time adding in new information in one, right, that doesn't overwhelm the student, right? So what we want is I to grow, but still be usable, right? So the idea is that we have to balance out these different components, right? And this is where Paul Nation's work comes in with the 4 strands. We have different, there are different ways of looking at language learning, right? There are 4 like different kinds of exercises. So we have meaning focused input. So this is listening and reading. Meaning focused output is speaking and writing. Fluency, and then language focused learning. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit more about these. But the idea is just that meaning focused input, you can learn what one is, right? It's only through input that you can get new structures and information, right? Meaning focused output is allowing you to acquire one as quickly as possible, right? So making one a part of I. And fluency is making sure that you don't lose anything that you've been learning, okay? And then I said for language focused learning, that's making I conscious. So it's talking about the grammar, for example. So this is more of the like traditional methodology is really what would fall under language focused learning, okay? So in our curriculum, we basically have, all these ideas are kind of like woven throughout the program. So for example, our grammatical progression, basically what we try to do is we have new material that is always as simple as possible. So the idea here is that we want you to be able to build on different like morphology, for example, or meanings based on what is easiest to acquire. Okay. And then we have fluency drills that solidify what you know. So that's kind of how we build in one and I. And then from a vocabulary standpoint, we have a kind of a global progression, right? Where we start out with concrete words that are easier to learn, again, so that you can build on easy to learn vocabulary items, and also frequent words, right, which are useful to learn. And then from an individual perspective, our progression involves going from more passive knowledge to active knowledge. So again, this is depth of processing. So we have 3 stages that each vocabulary word goes through: association, passive, and active, to try to solidify that in your memory, right? And then spaced repetition, to have you see these stages over and over and over again, over again increasingly longer intervals. And then we have things like skill practice, and long-term memory. So basically, the whole idea is that we've tried to build in reading and listening and into the association and passive stages of like the main curriculum, as well as we have a reading comprehension drill that is actually brand new. It will be out in a week. It's brand new to us too. It's right now in our staging environment. So, and that's something, again, that's just to help you develop skills in reading and listening, right? We have the application stage, that will develop your skills in writing and speaking, and the fluency also in writing and speaking. So this is all going to make sense, right, when Nick does the demo and you see these stages. But this is the why of what we're doing. And then we have, long-term memory, right? We have both paradigms and words feed into a spaced repetition system. So the idea is that we're treating a whole paradigm, for example, present, active, indicative verbs, whatever, as a kind of like a vocabulary item that we would then feed into this spaced repetition system, so that you're practicing it when you need to, right? So that's the idea. Kind of, some of the ideas on a higher level. Again, I would encourage you all to listen to the podcast series if you haven't, but hopefully this gives you some insight into why we're doing what we're doing.
So yeah, Kevin mentioned the podcast, and if you are interested in that, you can just go to biblingo.org/podcast. But I bring it up because one of the things we've talked about a lot is that when developing a curriculum or using a curriculum, choosing one, it's important to start with your outcomes, and then kind of reverse engineer how you're going to achieve those outcomes. So I put together here kind of what we see as perhaps what you would consider the learning objectives of Biblingo. And first, we're looking at learning objectives for basically what you might do in like beginner to intermediate Greek. So we recommend doing what we're going to look at over the course of 3 semesters. It's possible to do in 2, but we recommend 3. And these are the objectives that we think students can achieve with our program. And then we'll dive into the actual program to see how that happens. So one is just vocabulary and grammar acquisition, learning the words and grammar that you need to know. And so with the curriculum, I'll show you, we're covering over 1,000 vocabulary words per language, and kind of your standard like beginner to intermediate grammar that you would typically cover in these semesters. And then number 2, language proficiency, where you're actually getting basic proficiency across those 4 language skills: reading, listening, writing, and speaking, with all of that vocabulary and grammar. Number 3 is reading comprehension. So we're really pushing the ability to actually sight read a Greek text using all of that, a text that would use any of the known vocabulary and grammar that you learn, and actually intuitively understand its basic meaning and language features. And then we're also pushing reading fluency, so the ability to sight read a Greek text at a rate of at least 80 words per minute while maintaining that level of comprehension. And then also, last but not least, linguistic competence, that actually having the ability to explain key aspects of Greek grammar and across these categories, using linguistic categories, and actually apply them to analyze a text. So these are kind of the learning objectives, and we will see how that plays out in Biblingo.
Of course, all this applies to Hebrew as well, Just
Yeah. I was just giving kind of
plug Hebrew.
an example of like what you might put on in your syllabus or something like that. So now we are looking at the Biblingo program. Kevin, can you see it? Do I have the right thing pulled up? Okay. And so this is kind of the main page. It's a dashboard. It's actually a pretty new feature, and it really just is a way for students to track like everything that's happening in the app, from the activity, how much time they're spending and all of that, to vocabulary, like how many words they're actually learning, and their proficiency and all of that. So quite a bit of data is tracked here, but we will go ahead and dive into the language learning module and the lessons. So currently, per language, we have 31 lessons, and we're building up to 52. We actually have the curriculum already written for all 52 lessons, but it's just a matter of getting it into the app. So we will have 52 lessons available, and those 52 lessons total will cover, like I said, over 1,000 vocabulary words and just your standard beginner to intermediate grammar in terms of the topics that we cover. And so those are broken down into lessons and then further broken down into sub-lessons. So a sub-lesson would be like 1.1. And each sub-lesson covers between 4 and 6 vocabulary words and then one very bite-sized grammar topic. So you can see here, the grammar topic is the masculine singular call participle. So it's not even the full paradigm. It's very bite-sized to focus on depth of engagement with that topic. So we will dive into a lesson. And when you first visit a lesson, you'll get an introduction video. And so this is where we actually cover grammar explicitly. So we have grammar lessons where they're learning whatever the grammar topic is for this sub-lesson, as well as any other things you need to know about the vocabulary or anything like that. So in this video, for example, Kevin would cover, like I said, the masculine singular call participle primarily. And in addition to the intro videos for explicit grammar, we have lesson guides available, which basically just unpacks that in a lot more depth. And so kind of all those lesson guides for all the lessons collectively kind of make up the quote unquote Biblingo textbook. And these lesson guides are downloadable, so anyone who uses Biblingo can download them and keep them forever to refer back to. But really the core of these lessons are the interactive exercises. So you can see the progression on the left-hand side. You progress through vocabulary as well as grammar through those 3 stages Kevin mentioned. So association, passive, and active, and you do that for both vocab and grammar. So we're looking now at the association stage for vocab. So the idea is that you're associating the word with an image as well as audio, which you probably can't hear on your end, but it's there and plays automatically as you progress through. We do have other things available like some lexical info and grammatical info for those who want to dive in deeper. And so the idea is you would progress through all 6 of these vocabulary words in the association stage. And then you'd come to the passive stage. And so now you're seeing a familiar video or image, and now you have to recall the word that you've associated with that image. So then you would progress through, again, all the vocabulary items for this lesson until you get to the active stage. And so now you have to actually actively describe the familiar video or image that you're seeing. We have typing input available, we have speaking input available, and we do have a word bank for people who don't want to type or speak. We've included that as well. And you can do both of them. So you can set it up to where you practice typing and speaking for every single exercise. So then from there, you would progress to the grammar. And again, you would start in the association stage. So now you're associating actually a complete sentence that incorporates the grammar topic for this lesson. And that sentence describes the video. And then once again, you're getting the audio as well. We also include grammar symbols, which basically are a visual representation of aspects of grammar that you can't really represent in just a video. And so those are explained in the introduction videos as well. But again, the idea is you work through all these practice sentences in the association stage. We generally have about 4 to 7 sentences per grammar topic. And so these are all masculine singular call participle. Then you come to the passive stage. And again, you would select the sentence that describes the video, work through all the practice sentences, and then the active stage again, but now with complete sentences. And so and then finally, there is the final act, where it's basically the same thing as the active stage of grammar, but you're doing it with a sentence that you didn't previously see in the association stage. So it requires a bit more creative production from you. So that is really the gist of what a sublesson looks like. And so you just work through all the sublessons to cover all the grammar and vocab and start building the language proficiency and all of that. Then in addition to the lessons, we have one of the things we have are fluency drills. And so this is where you can develop fluency and keep reviewing the grammar that you're learning. So this is what Kevin was talking about with the paradigms. So I'll just dive into one for the Katal. And so basically what's going on here is the video tells you which verb, which like lexical item you're practicing, and then you basically conjugate it based on the context of the sentence and fill in the blank. And so you would just kind of rapidly work through all these fill in the blank questions where you're doing different forms of the Katal form to build fluency with it. And as Kevin mentioned, this is actually being put into a spaced repetition algorithm. So you can come to your paradigms that need practice each day, and it'll show you which ones you need to practice for the day based on that algorithm. Similarly, to review vocab, we have something called words that need practice. And so this is where the spaced repetition algorithm is automatically producing flashcard decks for you based on the vocab that you need to review. So you can see I'm a little bit behind on my vocab, which is a little bit embarrassing in this context. But normally you might have 2 or 3 decks here, depending on how much vocab you're learning at a time. But I need to catch up on that. And it just groups it into decks of 10 words to make it manageable. So that's how you're constantly reviewing the vocab that you're learning. And so then one thing Kevin mentioned as well, which is a brand new feature. And so I'm going to switch over to our staging server. So this is not live. This is where we kind of develop and test features. So it's not a finished feature yet. Keep that in mind. So you'll get a story, and then you'll get comprehension questions, which for beginner stories like this might be something like fill in the blank, and then for later stories might be actual like questions about the text and things like that. And so you'll answer either with multiple choice or by typing to submit your answer. That's the reading comprehension drill. We'll have audio for these, and you can actually turn off the text to just practice listening if you'd like to. But to kind of put all that together, right, you're working through the lessons, learning vocab, grammar, practicing all the different skills, and then you're really strengthening all those skills with the fluency drills for grammar, the flashcard decks for vocab, and the reading comprehension drills as well. That is, again, kind of what the first 3 semesters would look like. You would just divide those lessons up into 3 semesters ideally and work through all the lessons. Students would review using all the drills along the way, and you would achieve these objectives. I do want to very briefly look at what kind of classes beyond that might look like. And so this is just, again, an example of what a class might look like and what learning objectives might look like. So if you wanted to do for an additional semester, like a reading or exegesis class for the Gospel of John, this is what learning objectives might look like. So you would continue working on vocabulary acquisition, where you would aim to actually, whatever words you don't know of the Gospel of John after completing all our lessons, you would work to learn the remaining up to around 98% or more. And so I actually calculated that, and after completing Biblingo's lessons, this is actually a bit high. It would be about 300 words total, or about 20 per week for students to learn over the course of like a 15-week semester or something. Again, just an example. And then you would focus on reading proficiency. So, at this point, they've developed the ability to read at about 80 words per minute. So you could actually read the entire Gospel of John, in sections throughout the semester, once, twice, 3 times over the course of the semester if you wanted to. At that rate, it would take you about 3.5 hours at 80 words per minute, 3.5 hours to read the whole Gospel of John. And so it's actually quite doable to do it many times. And then exegetical skills, applying all those categories you learned in the explicit grammar to the text, and then also research skills, using other resources like commentaries and such. So very briefly, let me again show you in Biblingo what that might look like. So that's where we'll jump over to the Bible reading module. And I actually wanted to go to the Greek side for the Gospel of John. And so this is the Bible reading module. So you can see we have the full text of the Bible here. And what you can see here is the text is color coded. It's usually a bit more colorful than this. The colors you can see here represent kind of where the words are in the spaced repetition algorithm. I archived the words to represent like finishing Biblingo lessons, and so they're all white, but they might actually be like green or something like that in an actual account. But it does show you that, after completing all of Biblingo's lessons, you would know about 87% of this chapter, John chapter 1. So that's what this 87% is. And we actually, in the Bible reading module, have the Bible index, which organizes the whole Bible based on the percentage of words you learned. So again, this kind of corresponds to having completed all our lessons, as well as chapters as well. And so that's how you might choose the Gospel of John based on the higher percentages. And then what you would do is, to make up for those words that you don't know in the Gospel of John, again, a brand new feature that is not quite out yet, is not released yet, is generating flashcard decks based on books. So you can come here. I'm on the Hebrew side. But you can basically just automatically generate flashcard decks that basically are like, I want all the words that I don't already know in the whole book of John. And it'll and you can say like, I want 10 words per deck, and it'll generate all the decks for you. So then students can basically just start chipping away at the vocab they don't already know in the Gospel of John as they dive into to actually read it. And so what that looks like is, again, diving into the actual biblical text, starting to read it. They can mark verses as read. You can see here as they read. If you're assigning for them to read it multiple times, it has a little counter here. So, they can read that passage again for the week, and it'll count how many times they're learning it. And then for those more exegetical research skills, you can see like, I don't know this word, so I might click on it and it opens a dictionary. Our dictionary breaks words up by various senses of the word, and then we have information like gloss, semantic domains, and things like that. You can see other verses that use this word to do research. And then we have a search feature here as well, where they can search by the Greek or Hebrew word, English gloss, or semantic domain to do some more research as well.
Yeah, I think a big question in all of this, right, is just how in the world do you do this in the classroom? Because this is not something that most teachers are used to doing, right? The vast, well, pretty much all seminary classrooms are built around a textbook, and we don't really have a textbook, right, that you are going through in the same way. So I just want to spend some time on how you can implement Biblingo in the classroom in 3 different ways you can do that. Whether it's using an outside textbook or not using the outside textbook. So we'll get to that at the end. But here are just some ways in which you can utilize these resources. To begin with, I just want to talk a little bit about what we believe the role of the teacher is. And this is, again, from Paul Nation's work. He says that there are 4 roles: to plan, train, test, and teach. Okay. And in planning, he says, is the most important. And that's something that we have done, the most work on for you, right? So the idea is that you would just basically have to plug in, our progression, and you basically just do whatever the program tells you to do, or your students do, right? And then it's to train. So training is training your students how to learn the languages, right? Or how to learn language in general. And this is something that isn't necessarily obvious, right? Especially if people haven't learned a second language before. This is something that needs to be learned in and of itself. we obviously have principles that are built into the program, right? Like spaced repetition, that are helpful for this, but you would obviously need to help train them as well. There's testing. So we will be providing testing material. But this is something that, you would have to, as a teacher, kind of gauge where your class is and figure out what really should be tested and, at what time. And then there's teaching. So again, this is something, I give a short little grammatical explanation at the beginning of each sub lesson. But I don't, clarify, right, in anything when students have questions, right? So this would be where you would come in and you clarify, okay, what exactly is this particular form and what does it mean, et cetera, et cetera. So this is where most people spend most of their time teaching. We think that students should spend most of their time using the language in the classroom. So basically what we have done is we have created a whole set of drills that go along with each of the sub-lessons that you would use in the classroom. Okay, so you would teach, right, in the sense that you would explain grammatical issues and help clarify things. But the primary thing that would happen in the classroom is that students would use the language, and specifically with others, right? Because the advantage of the classroom setting is having multiple learners in the same room or on Zoom together, being able to do paired activities or group activities and sharpen one another in what they know. Okay, so here's just a sample lesson. So I've just created, so back up, like this is every single lesson goes through these kinds of drills. So this is like specifically the teacher material, right? So this is something that you would get. Let's say you want to adopt Biblingo into your classroom. These are slide decks that you would get and you would use inside the class. So first of all, you'd have a fluency drill. So this fluency drill is kind of rotates between the different skills, so reading and writing and listening and speaking, and you would just basically do whatever that drill tells you to do. You have meaning focused exercise, so this would be specific to this sub lesson, right? Whatever topic it is, you would focus on that topic and do an exercise that involves the students using that form with the appropriate meaning, and then a verse, right, that demonstrates the meaning in some way, or that's just interesting and fun. So this is lesson 14.1. So this would be kind of at the end of the first semester. So the ideal progression, kind of what we're saying is to do 52 lessons in 3 semesters is 17 lessons per semester. And that comes out to basically like 5 sub lessons per week. Okay. So we think that's a pretty reasonable pace. If you have 3 credit hours, you would basically be doing, you could basically do, if you had 3 blocks of an hour, you could do, two sub lessons per block with 1 review every week, right? That would be the idea. Okay. So, this is, in this particular sub lesson, we're learning Vekatal, in Hebrew, and you will first do a fluency drill, right, for reading. Then you'll do the topic, exercise, and then we'll look at Genesis 3:18. So I'm not going to go through all this, but I just want you to get a feel for what it looks like. So this reading fluency drill, right? So this is a story that I wrote, very simple, short, and it is on their level. So there's no reason why, and in fact, we have students going through this material now, so, and they can listen to it, read it, comprehend it, right? There's no reason why your students shouldn't be able to read the story with comprehension without a lexicon, right? And that's exactly what we're going for here. Being able to just read the text because you know all the words and all the grammar necessary to do that. So in this particular drill, right, you just read through the story, at a normal pace, and then in the next slide, right, I have the same story, except I exchanged the third person for first person, right? So Melech, king, becomes Anochi, I, and then you read the same story, right? So what this does is it helps the students to build up their skill in reading, right? So right, what we're trying to do with this drill is just help students, learn to pronounce the words and the sounds, to just read and recognize these words. So this is how you can get your reading comprehension and speed up. Okay. And then we have, the last one with the plural, first person. And again, same story. We're just reading to comprehend it, and build up fluency, right? And then we have our grammar topic. So all of this, we're thinking like it takes 10 to 15 minutes, right? And then we have our grammar topic, Vekatal. So there's a short grammar explanation, right? So there's morphology, okay? So this just shows, the different, very quickly highlights of what you need to know to produce the form. There will be a lot more extensive things within the lesson guide, right? But this is just say, hey, for new students, like the stress shifts in first and second person in Vekatal, right?
And just a note here that students have already covered this material in the app when they come to class and get this lesson. So.
Right. So this is an opportunity for you to answer any questions that they might have, and go into a little bit more detail on what the form is and what it means. Okay. And then we have this slide, right, on the meaning. So it's what you really need to know, right? Primary uses of the form, what might be helpful to know, but you really don't need to know. And this is just kind of a little bit more theoretical, and this is from me, right? So this is debated, and we'll actually have links to more, especially with some of the more controversial issues in our lesson guides, to references that students can go to find out more, to read more, etc. about all this. But this gives the student an idea of, okay, like when I see it in the text, what do I really need to know? And what might be, again, some of the things that they might want to look further into if they're interested. And then we just have the exercise. So again, we have the same story, and we are just converting the Vayiktol to Vekatal, right? So something like this, allows the student to see this story, 4-5 times, right? Within this same, so this is the same one, again, the same story, but in first person, and now you need to convert this one, right? So the idea is that, you are going to build proficiency, right? In that 30 minutes that you're going to devote to this sub-lesson in your classroom, right? The students are going to get a lot of practice reading, right? And that's exactly what you want, right? If you want the student to walk away from the class being able to, read the Hebrew Old Testament or Greek New Testament, they've got to practice reading as much as they can. So this is the idea. And then we have a verse. So a verse like this is, very simple, right? But this is the opportunity to kind of like get into more of the weeds and the exegetical issues in the passage. So this is just a snippet of Genesis 3:18. Again, all the verses or all the snippets of verses are chosen with the vocabulary of the student in mind. So, we know that they know all these words in all these forms, right? And you can give a short grammatical explanation of, the various things in this passage. Okay. So the idea is that you can use this curriculum in a number of ways. Okay. This is enough material, right, for you to use Biblingo as the curriculum for your course. So you could just say, hey, like I want to just use Biblingo for everything. I don't need a textbook. You'll just use the lesson guides. You'll use these slides. You'll use the in-app progression. So the idea behind it is this: every day, the student has his or her particular homework, right? It's just doing the sub lesson in Biblingo before class, right? So for this class, they would do 14.1 and 14.2, and you would go through the slide deck of 14.1 and 14.2 for class, right? And that would be your course. Second, you could use Biblingo's progression along with a textbook. So you could say, okay, I like this progression. I really like the way this works and is looking. But I also really like a textbook that I've been using for a long time. So you could just say, okay, let's have the students do Biblingo, right? Every day at home, work through the sub lessons. And for each of the grammatical issues, right, you can reference the textbook, right, in the appropriate place. So, for Vekatal, you take your favorite textbook, you say, okay, your homework is using Biblingo 14.1, and then it's also to read, the section in Basis of Biblical Hebrew on Vekatal, right? That would be the idea. And then, in the classroom as well, you can give, your own grammatical explanations. You can give your own, exercises, weave those in. And you can, if there's a verse or two in the textbook, obviously you can talk about those as well. Or you can use a textbook's progression, right? And Biblingo for supplementary exercises. So, we really do believe in our progression. So I would recommend using our progression. But if you say, hey, I really like the way we, let me just back up. The reason why we progressed through, the grammatical features and stuff of the language the way we do is to acquire it in a living way, right? So that at the end you can listen to the text, you can read the text, you can write the language with fluency. Okay, so most textbooks are not designed to do that, and that's why we would recommend, if that's your goal, using Biblingo's progression and supplementing with the textbook, right? If though, you say, hey, like my primary goal is people to learn the grammar, right? And I think Biblingo is a great way to supplement what we have, in a certain textbook, and to get extra practice. Then you can use it, the textbook's progression, and Biblingo can just be homework, right? They just work through it. And so what's going to happen is, especially, in the beginning, there's going to be mismatches between like vocabulary, for example, right? So they're going to be learning the vocabulary in Biblingo in a different progression than the textbook. But as you progress, that gap is going to get narrower and narrower, right? You're eventually going to learn, all the words that you would see in a textbook, you would learn in Biblingo for sure. I mean, most textbooks, like introductory textbooks, cover around like 400 to 500 words. We're going to cover 1,000. So you're probably not going to be missing words from Biblingo. So that's the basic idea on what it would look like to adopt Biblingo and use it in the classroom.
Just a little bit of a picture of what it might actually look like to partner with us and incorporate Biblingo in one of those ways that Kevin mentioned. So one way is just to be a Biblingo advocate. You like what you saw and you think it would be helpful, and so you recommend Biblingo to students at your institution. And so we would love to enter into more of a formal partnership with any institutions that would like to do this, where we connect and we give you like an institution specific discount for 20%, 25% off for all your students, and you can just recommend it and give that out at your institution. So just for context, we do have a kind of standard academic discount for 15% off that anyone who comes across our website can use. So this is, 25% over instead of 15. So then number 2 would be to actually, so this could be at just a classroom, individual teacher or institution level, to require Biblingo as course material, kind of like you would require a textbook. And in this case, again, we would still offer your students 25% off when they purchase it for their class. But this way, if you go this route, you also get the bonus teacher resources to use in class as well. And then the third way to partner would be to kind of see Biblingo as an institutional asset, in the sense that you purchase Biblingo on behalf of the students at your institution. So this would be the institution purchases, however many licenses to be able to provide it to their students. Again, we offer discounted rates that would start at 25% for the institution, and that would increase based on the volume of licenses that the institution is purchasing. And this also includes the bonus teacher resources for all of the institution's teachers that will be using it. So those are kind of the 3 big ways that we would love to partner with either individual teachers or institutions as a whole. And last thing before we open it up to questions and discussion is just if you want to get in touch about any of that, then you can reach out to me directly. So my email address is nick@biblingo.org. And then if you'd like to actually schedule a call to talk more about this and next steps, you can you can just email me and schedule it the old-fashioned way. But if it's convenient for you, you can visit my scheduling tool. And I will post these in the chat as well. Yeah, with that, let's open it up to questions. And we just had one come in from other Nick. And the bonus teacher resources, just to clarify, are like the slide decks that Kevin shared, that in addition to the Biblingo software program that students are using kind of outside of class for homework, the teachers would get access to those slide decks to use in class that cover the same material as the Biblingo program. Oh, another great question just came in. And yeah, for questions, you can submit them in the chat. And I don't know, if it's not too chaotic, feel free to just unmute and jump in as well. Either way, but Ben just asked, is there a dashboard for professors to monitor student progress? Yes, so that's another brand new feature, but we have teacher accounts that we'll set all teachers up with. And basically you can generate a classroom code, give that to all your students. They put that into their account and it kind of connects you guys, and then you can monitor their progress and basically see all that data, the same data you saw in the dashboard, the student dashboard, you can see for each of your students individually as well as your class collectively. So you can monitor progress. Another question, is there a minimum class size to qualify? No, there's not. Yeah, and yeah, it may be helpful to pull up our pricing. So we try to be pretty flexible with our pricing. So we have a lot of different plans available. So you can see, probably focusing on just the one language, I would think, for just a specific class. And then basically the breakdown, the learner plan, you get the language learning module as well as all the flashcard module. The reader plan, you get the Bible reading module and flashcards. And then the accelerator plan, you get all 3 modules. So the learner plan would be for kind of that like first 3 semesters where you have the lessons and all the review stuff and the flashcards. And then the reader plan might be for like a exegesis or reading class where you have the Bible reading module and the flashcards, but you wouldn't have access to the lessons. So the accelerator plan could really be for an advanced class if you want students to have the option to like review the lessons and all that. But so you can just kind of think like probably you do like a half yearly since it's for the full semester. And then it would be 25% off of that for that sort of partnership.
So yeah, we basically right now, like everything is written for the all of the later lessons. It's a massive amount of tedious work to get all the pronunciations, all of the audio for all the pronunciations in the app and everything checked. So it's right now it's a matter of checking things and doing some of the grammar, like intro grammar videos. So this is something that we have to do by by the end of the year. So it'll happen for sure. Of course, we're always going to be coming out with new content. The dictionary, for example, that the Bob reading module is linked to, like, is always being updated. But as far as just the base 52 lessons, it'll be out this year.
As well as another thing to note on that is the paradigm, the fluency drills for paradigms will have those for all of the paradigms, and the reading comprehension will have a lot more stories as well. So that'll all be available for like starting in the fall semester.
Yeah. And we will have readings for every sub lesson starting at the end of lesson 2. Some of them will be like repeats, right? So to build that fluency and stuff, but that will come. Ron asks, is the dictionary a full lexicon? Yes. There are like holes in the sense that there are places where I know we need to go back and work on it. The Greek one is actually much better than the Hebrew one right now, just from a data perspective. But both of them should have, all the words and etc. If there is a word that, sometimes it'll show like no data, it's just because there's some sort of like mix up with the how it's linking to the lexicon, right? And we just fix it and move on. So yes, the lexicon is part of the Bible module. So basically what happens is when you click on a word in the Bible module, you're looking at our database, our lexicon, right? The Biblingo lexicon. The Old Testament lexicon is based, so it was originally based on BDB, but it's now it's some sort of like mixture of things. I mean, in 2 or 3 years, it will be like its own thing entirely. But just depending on how much time I have to give to it is really the only thing. So.
Oh, hi. Can I ask a question by voice?
Sure.
Absolutely. Yeah.
By the way, I'm just a complete independent learner, and I joined the Biblingo in March, so I've been doing it for 2 months. But I've really enjoyed it. I started out in Greek. I started learning Greek last year, but then I've just switched into Hebrew, and I think it's a really great resource. So I just really recommend it. And sorry, it's Daniel, not Erica. That's my wife. But just a question is for the speaking element. Outside of Biblingo, the Biblingo app, what would you recommend to do in terms of like learning to speak kind of on your own, especially, when your family is not learning Greek or Hebrew? Could I do conversations with myself? Anything to encourage speaking outside of the app. And then, sorry, this is just a second kind of unrelated question, but for Hebrew, are there any books that you would recommend at kind of like a beginner level within the Bible? I keep hearing about Ruth and Jonah as being like kind of the basic beginner books to read, but would you have any like recommendations beyond those books or any portions of the Bible? So they're kind of two unrelated questions, but yeah, thanks.
Yeah. So the first one, as far as conversation, there have been some responses in the chat to things like this. So you can try so we are actually doing a like conversation type or based curriculum called Biblingo Live. So you can do that if you wanted. You can talk to Nick about that. That would be where you would get practice based on our progression, and it's usually just cohorts of 2 to 5 people, where you just get concentrated time. So other than that, finding conversation partners, there might be people here. There are people that speak Greek and Hebrew, And so, what I would always recommend is, just like, trying to just find those people. And then, when I honestly, the way I got good at speaking the languages was I talked to my friend in Greek for 45 minutes every single day in the summer. Like we just like without fail, it was on the phone, but like we were just, that's what we did. And so that's the kind of thing that you have to do to get good. The second question was, like easy stories. So honestly, the Bible is hard. Like it's the text itself is, it's hard to jump into. So what I would recommend is, in our, we will be rolling out. So part of, the reading comprehension is simplified Bible stories. So I would just recommend working through those. I mean, Jonah, I know people recommend Jonah, like Jonah 2, everyone knows is quite difficult. And Jonah has some like linguistic peculiarities as well. I don't really like to recommend Jonah right off the bat. Ruth is also unique in that there's a lot of feminine forms, right, that you don't see in a lot of other places. I think something like Joshua, right, is pretty good to start with. But and I think part of the reason why Jonah and Ruth are recommended is because they're short, right? But what I would do really is, if you're just focused on reading, I would just use the program to tell you which chapter the best, right? Because really you don't have to read through a whole book, right? What you're trying to do is just gain proficiency in the language. So I would just see, okay, I'm on lesson 20, right? Is there a book, or is there a chapter in the Bible that I know 95% of the words of, whatever, and just work through text in that way. But yeah, that's a short answer.
Yeah, just quick on conversations. So we do Biblingo Live is a kind of paid service on top of our app where you get the cohort of other students, but also an instructor who can facilitate conversation. But then we do have like a Facebook group called, and I know Facebook's not for everyone, but Biblingo, Biblical Language Learners. And really the idea behind that was to facilitate like people who are working through Biblingo's progression to be able to connect and practice that sort of thing together. And then I know Joey just volunteered to be your conversation partner. He does Biblingo Live as well, so he would be a great conversation partner. And then, yeah.
Maybe I can answer a question earlier from Paul. Are there any plans to incorporate more living language type stuff like TPR, commands, conversation items, etc.? So yeah, all of those. So, okay. When you say like commands, for example, right, you learn commands within the program, right? So we have a particular grammar symbol, and you would see the video, right? And you would know that I'm supposed to give the command that matches the video. We do have in my head eventually an exercise planned for like a sort of like conversation practice. But basically, so it would basically be like more like question and answer type of things. And it could be like commands. So something more like dialogue, right? That's one of the only things in Biblingo right now that we don't have like set up for is like how do we simulate dialogue and allow you to practice it. So that will be something that would be in the future, but it probably won't be this year. As far as conversation items, for Biblingo Live, we have created a sort of like list of vocabulary items that are useful, just like how do you greet people, right? Those kinds of things. How do you say, what does this mean? So those things we've talked about putting into a preset deck within Biblingo. We will probably do that eventually when we have some time. But yeah, that's again kind of the short answer. But
Yeah, great questions coming in. So Chris, about lesson outlines. We have things we use internally, and we just haven't yet produced a nice, clean outline of all the grammar and vocabulary. But we'll absolutely do that to provide to teachers who are going to use it, and we will plan on doing that very quickly so that they're available. We have things, but they're just not pretty, and they're kind of used internally. But we'll make lesson outlines available. And then, Kevin, do we have a key? We do have a key for the grammar symbols, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's in the app too.
Yeah.
Someone asked about Aramaic. Yes, that's coming. I had originally talked to Syrian guy about doing Syriac this summer. I'm not sure if that's going to happen this summer, but yes, there are plans for Aramaic, and probably not just Syriac, but several other dialects as well. There was another one I just saw. Oh, any plans that students to make Biblingo available in other languages? So we are currently translating it into Spanish and French. We'll have Arabic and Russian as well. So all of that should be Spanish and French should be this year. So basically, it'll be the user interface plus the glosses and stuff in Spanish and French. Arabic and Russian will either be late this year or early next year. Latin, Ge'ez, Old Slavonic. No, sorry. I mean, we have talked about. So we have talked about Akkadian and Ugaritic. I mean, honestly, with Latin, there's just a lot of good resources for Latin. There really isn't for some of the other, Ge'ez, you could make an argument for. But anyway, I don't know. I mean, those are definitely, further out. But the next language is certainly Aramaic, which may still happen this year.
Oh yeah, it looks like Luke. I think you had asked this before. Sorry. What textbooks best correspond with your lesson progression?
Here's the problem, right? With textbooks. I mean, it's not a problem with textbooks, but it's a problem with mapping textbooks onto our curriculum. Is like, again, no one teaches the call singular masculine participle by itself, right? Because what you do in a textbook is you put the whole paradigm there, right? Because you're not as interested. Most of the time, you're not as interested in like developing fluency in that. So we take like baby steps, right? And make sure that you get that form inside of you before going on. So because of that, it is very difficult to say like, what textbook, maps on best. But that being said, we're not really revolutionary in our progression, right? Like if you look at like from a higher level perspective, like what are you going to learn, in Greek, for example, you're going to learn the present active indicative, right? With no wow. I can't think of contract verbs. Sorry. I'm like, what is that word in English? So those are the kinds of things that you're going to learn. And that's the kind of thing that you see in most textbooks, right? That you learn the strong verb first, then the weak verbs and whatever, or the contract verbs. And then, you would see, the like first and second declension nouns that aren't irregular first, right? All those kinds of things. Like, so it isn't like we don't do anything revolutionary in that perspective. What is different is, per sub lesson, right? You're going to find hard to map on one-to-one. If you look at a slice of 3 or 4 lessons, you can probably find textbooks that are pretty close.
One thing to mention as well is from a vocabulary standpoint. On the one hand, we have in the flashcard module tab called preset decks that we like Biblingo creates and puts in. And we created flashcard decks that correspond like by chapter to Plummer and Merkel's beginning with New Testament Greek. But with this new flashcard update, you'll actually be able to share flashcard decks. And so as a teacher, you could create custom flashcard decks that correspond to, each chapter of the textbook that you like and share that with all your students. And in addition to that, we do plan to create our own preset decks to kind of take that work off your plate too, to correspond to popular textbooks. But that's just one way that you can try to map on is at least creating flashcard decks that correspond to the textbook. Oh, that's helpful. Yeah, Teresa. So Teresa worked through Biblingo and a Hebrew textbook together. For first semester Hebrew. I won't get into her story, but it's very impressive. But she worked through the two together, and she said that they were synergistic, not quite, matching the textbook that she used and Biblingo, but she said like the progression worked well together. So that's helpful information.
And I think there have been, we know several of our students, right, have just done Biblingo while in seminary, right? And they just go through Biblingo, and it just helps them, just outside of the classroom to learn forms and vocabulary in a way that's, normally better than how they would otherwise, right? I mean, the textbooks normally don't tell you how to learn the vocabulary words. They tell you, here's the vocabulary you need to learn, right? And so we try to, hold your hand and help you in acquiring those words, and not just tell you, here's what you need to do. So I do think, at the end of the day, even for self-study students within a seminary, right? Just using Biblingo for 20 minutes a day, like we have plenty of people that do that and they find that it works well.
Yeah. Chris said, I'm inclined to make a clean break with the textbook I've been teaching with and make Biblingo the core progression. We have the same inclination. But I will say, like, the reason that I think that is a great way to do it is, one, because like our progression is like the way that the exercises work is like you really need to know the vocab and grammar, in order, like leading up to that point to complete our exercises. So it just makes sense. Whereas a textbook, like, it doesn't build in that same way. But what is really easy, and Kevin mentioned this, but is, if the sub-lesson, the grammar topic for that class or whatever is like, the call participle, it's very easy to just look in the table of contents of a textbook and find the chapter for that grammar topic and open it up and read their explanation. So it's just a lot easier to follow Biblingo's progression and supplement it. So a question about, does Biblingo have agreements for institutions for credit? Or I don't know if that meant to say with institutions. For example, if a high school wanted to use it as part of dual enrollment for college credit, if so, would it be something like an intro to Hebrew? We don't have any like existing relationships with institutions right now that accept, completing Biblingo as like credit or anything like that. But we would love to have those relationships. And, it's like Biblingo's, in the grand scheme of things, very new. We just launched the program publicly last July. We were beta testing it for quite a while before that, but our public launch was just in July of 2020. So, we just haven't gotten to connect with institutions in that way, but we definitely see that as a potential, that institutions would be open to that sort of thing.
Well, and something that we have taken steps towards doing. So it's not just like wishful thinking, but we've had conversations and are trying to do that. Because we know, like, that would be, it would be very appealing to be able to just like use Biblingo and get college credit for it, right? Just across the board, both for us and for our students. So Biblingo students will have a very good shot of placing out of university level courses, probably 2 semesters for sure, 1. And that's what Teresa said. And of course, that obviously depends on how far you get in Biblingo as well. I think it really shouldn't. Yeah, I mean, if you did all of Biblingo, you really should place out of as many semesters as you would need to in an institution normally. I would think.
Yeah. That's a good point, Doug. Yeah, it's just kind of like Kevin said, something we're working toward, and something that takes time for people to sign off on, but it's definitely something we hope for. And the more people that are incorporating it and using it, I think the better shot we have at expediting that process. So, all right.
Well, thank you guys.
Yeah, thanks everyone for coming and for sticking around for the whole thing. Like I said, my email address and my Calendly link are in the chat right now. We'll send out follow-up email to everyone who registered with a recording, and we can get in touch that way as well. But yeah, that is all we've got. So thanks again for joining.